All right, welcome back to the Beast Game Podcast. This is a review for Maze Runner: The Death Cure. It's directed by Wes Ball. The writer is T.S. Nolan, and it's based on a novel by James Dashner. It stars Dylan O'Brien, Ki-Hung Lee, and Kaya Scodelario. And the synopsis is, young hero Thomas embarks on a mission to find a cure for a deadly disease known as the flare. This is the third movie in the line of Maze Runner films. I like the first one. Involves children being put into a area where they can't get out of. They're not sure how they got there. And at one point, a female character shows up and kind of throws off the whole dynamic. And there's also a maze that opens up once a day that has some robotic spiders. The lead character, Thomas, is one of the last children to show up. The second movie, they find out that this is a whole big grand conspiracy, that there's some company called Wicked trying to solve a disease called the flare. It's set in a post-apocalyptic world. Big conspiracy behind it, double crossing. And then you get to this movie where it's the haves versus the have-nots. There's this big uprising about the way that the conspiracy has gone. The one thing I can say is that this movie is kind of centered around Ki-Hung Lee, that he's taken captive by Wicked. Thomas and the other characters want to break him out. So that's the whole grand scheme of this movie. And I like the first movie. The second movie I wasn't that fond of, but I was positive on it. And by the time that this movie has come out, it's really just a lot of franchise fatigue. It's a lot of posturing. You beat over the head with all the events from the previous movies, and it just becomes very heavy. Since this is the third movie, that the time has passed on a lot of these teen sci-fi novels to movies. Things like The Hunger Games. You had things like Divergent, Mortal Instrument City of Bones. You had The Fifth Wave. You had I Am Number 4. You had The Giver. The first movie came out. They were still kind of riding high off of Twilight. I think that when people decided to make the decision to go the Lord of the Rings route, where you have to drag on all these books, you have to make every movie into two parts, by the time you get to this movie, it's just over and done with. Again, you're just being slapped repeatedly by the events and drama from all the previous movies. That era of teenage sci-fi movies, it just doesn't need to exist any longer. It's not interesting. The times have passed on these movies as well, just because the first movie came out in 2014, the second movie came out in 2015. It's now 2018, and that's where the majority of the movie-going public turned on these types of movies. And that's what happened to the Divergent series. It just got to a point where the mass populace just didn't care any longer. And getting back to the Maze Runner, I just found this a little too drawn out. Again, everything is centered around a rescue attempt for Ki-Hung Lee, who is captive by Wicked. Kaya Scodelario character and Dylan O'Brien both have a past, and that comes back to play into this movie. The drama from the past two movies just got a little bit boring for me, and I just wasn't interested by the time we got to this movie. You just really want to get it over with. Well, on top of that, this movie is just too long. It's almost 2.5 hours, and it is just drawn out. The last act just keeps going on and on. You know how it's going to end. You have to know how it's going to end, because the guy Thomas either one needs to die or two needs to live. Again, it's just not that interesting at this point. The first hour and a half is drama mixed with a couple of action scenes, and then the last act is where all the action is. There you have faceless nobodies that just add to the body count because they need action. The acting is average in any of these types of sci-fi movies. Always have the reluctant hero that has to grow into being a hero, and their buddies that just want to tag along. Having said all that, I'm going to give this a 4.5 out of 10. I like the first movie because it's a mixture of Lord of the Flies, a science fiction movie, and a government conspiracy movie. The second movie just turns into a straight action movie. This movie's just a history lesson in what happened in the previous movies. And if I really had to compare it to something, it would be maybe similar to Terminator Salvation. It's just like, get on with it. Just get it over and done with. The acting is basic. The drama surrounding all the previous movies just weighs on you too much. It looks good. I guess that's more of a positive. And it closes out the series. So that's pretty much all you can ask for. This movie is really just for the people that are invested in the books, They love the books, and they just want to see how this one plays out on the screen. But for the mass public, spend your time and your money somewhere else. So 4.5 out of 10, and that's the Beast Game Podcast.